A few years ago, during a particularly depressing winter, I saw a video from one of my favorite kaiju YouTubers, a Japanese gentleman by the name of Giwachin. He was exploring a Godzilla-themed VR world when suddenly he came upon a corner of the map that featured something unexpected, given the context. A small world made to look like an old Japanese city street and featuring movie posters of an odd-looking fellow with a square face, a tan jacket, and a small fedora. Giwachin seemed pretty excited about this character, and realizing that there were a ton of posters for this apparent film series, I grew very curious. Obviously, whatever it was had to have had some longevity to it and be popular there, but I'd never heard of it. I'm no mega expert on Japanese culture, but I know their pop culture well enough. I assumed I'd at least have heard of it in passing. Investigating, I discovered it to be the long-running franchise known as Otoko Wa Tsurai Yo, roughly translated to It's Hard Being a Man or It's Tough Being a Man, and often shortened to the Tora San series after its main star, Tora, aka Torajiro Kuruma. The franchise began as a 1968 TV series that ran a year and ended with Tora being killed off by a poisonous snake. But due to the immense popularity of the character, there was fan outrage at killing him at all, forcing the writer-director Yoji Yamada to reboot the character for a feature film, 1969's Otoko Wa Tsurai Yo. What was meant to be a sort of apology to the fans, however, turned into a hit feature that demanded continuation. And though Yamada had intended for there to be no more than 5 movies in the series, ending with Tora San's runaway, the enduring success and popularity of the character continued pushing them on and on and on, eventually leading to the creation of 50 feature films in the official movie series, making it the Guinness record holder for a movie franchise starring the same primary actors. Learning about all this was kind of astonishing. Somehow I'd never heard of this franchise and naturally was curious what it could be like. Clearly, if it was so immensely long-lasting and popular in Japan, it had to at least be worth a peek if I could get my hands on them. Unlike most major Japanese franchises like Godzilla, Studio Ghibli, the works of Kurosawa, or many of their famous anime franchises that have found success in audiences in the West, Tora San seemed to have been overlooked and almost completely unknown, with only one DVD release in America by Animego in 2009 collecting the first 4 movies of the series, giving Western audiences a taste of the character. But that edition is ludicrously scalped at this point, so I made with the good old yo-ho-ho, a pirate's life for me methods to get my hands on the first movie to at least see if it was worth a look and at least get the curiosity bug out of my system. Well, that was my big mistake, or in truth, one of the best decisions I ever made. But from a position of my sanity and what would transpire over the next few years, a huge mistake, because I underestimated the power of the Tora. I simply assumed I'd check the movie out, maybe watch a few random ones that were considered highlights of the series, and be done with it. After all, who has the time or the sanity in this modern age to sit through a 50-movie franchise that was slice-of-life comedy and romantic drama? The original movie centers around Tora returning to his hometown of Shibamata, Tokyo, after being away some 20 years, having run away as a juvenile delinquent who was always making and getting himself into the middle of trouble. Going home to his aunt and uncle's sweet shop, he reunites with his younger sister, Sakura, and hijinks ensue as he inserts himself into their lives again and causes all manner of frustration and stress, especially as Sakura attempts to find employment and get married. Eventually, Sakura marries her sweetheart by the end of the film, a marriage that lasts the entirety of the 50-movie and 50-year franchise, and Tora resumes his life of wandering, peddling cheap wares on the roadside to support himself. I have a special love for Showa-era Japanese movies, meaning basically all of their movie industry until the era changed in 1989. And the majority of the franchise obviously takes place during this period, but Tora kicked off at the end of the 60s and ran uninterrupted in Japanese theaters for 26 years until the death of Tora actor Kiyoshi Atsumi, with his final movie, Tora San to the Rescue, premiering Christmas of 1995. Most years of the series' history, there were a minimum of 2 films a year, sometimes 3, quickly stacking up the film count with each passing year until it had amassed a staggering sum of 48 films starring Atsumi and 2 subsequent films after he had died, with mainstays of the franchise starring in those. After watching the first movie, I found myself with a little bit of a problem. I had absolutely loved the movie. It wasn't just Showa-era charming and fun, it was sometimes hilarious, and also struck that perfect balance Japanese movies often do, where they sucker punch you and make you go from laughing one minute and then leaking water out of your eye holes the next. The movie made me laugh and cry, and instantly I fell in love with its cast of characters, especially Tora, and I felt that nagging sense of suspicion that I was in trouble, because anyone who knows me knows that when I like a movie or a show, I tend to go overboard and commit to watching and absorbing everything that franchise has to offer. But in the case of Tora, it wasn't just coming to a small experience with a short series of films. This was going to be a huge commitment, and obviously you know what happened. It didn't help that I discovered that some of the accompanying actors in the franchise were people I loved from other properties. Throughout the movies, occasionally there would be small roles from well-loved actors like Takeshi Shimura, the legendary Japanese actor who starred in Seven Samurai and the original Gojira, among others. But a large part of the later Tora films also featured Hidetaka Yoshioka, who not only recently got a lot of eyes on him in the West for his supporting role in Godzilla -1, but was the leading character in the Always Sunset on 3rd Street trilogy, which are films I also adore. In fact, the Tora San franchise was his beginning in acting. You can actually watch him start as a very young boy and follow his character through maturity and into adulthood. Eventually, it became obvious to me that I was on the hook and doomed to watch the series through. So, what is it about the franchise that managed to keep it alive and kicking for almost 3 decades straight and enduring popularity to this day? Each movie follows a basic formula that rarely changed too much, being that Tora would find himself in the middle of domestic disputes or complicated situations around the daily lives of others, usually the movie's central female love interest, and through his involvement would usually strike some balance of complicating but also helping the story's characters come to a resolution to their problems. Tora would typically fall in love with the leading lady, whether she was aware of it or not, and find himself inevitably jilted by the end of the story as he continued his life of peddling and wandering the Japanese countryside, making friends with his winning smile and enthusiastic personality, but always chasing the domestic happiness that was just out of his reach, in large part due to his own insecurities and fears of commitment, but also simply due to bad luck and circumstances. The faces would change, the scenarios and locations would change, but by and large that was the formula, and the audience loved it, because they loved him and his family. Later movies would shift the focus so that Mitsuo, Tora's nephew, played by Yoshioka, would essentially share the movie as the co-lead, and his own dramas take center stage as Atsumi's health began to fail and demanded that he took up less screen time. But essentially, the experience of watching the series through is the actual experience of watching a main character and an entire family age and live their lives and their dramas in semi-real time. His sister Sakura was played by idol Chieko Baisho, who, for Ghibli fans, you would know her as the voice of Sophie in Howl's Moving Castle. Remarkably, for a franchise that lasted so long, there were shockingly few changes in the cast, giving it an additional level of stability and familiarity that gives it part of its enduring charm. One of the main cast of characters, who was the only one seeing any major recasting, was in fact Mitsuo, through his childhood years until the casting of Yoshioka, who became the permanent fixture of the character, and Tora's uncle when the first actor, Shin Morikawa, died after 8 films, leading to 2 additional actors playing the character. But beyond that, the leads remained constant, while the leading ladies, called the Madonnas, changed with every film to give the storyline a fresh story and love interest for Tora, until later on when he would serve as more of a mentor role to the characters. So what is it about this franchise that got me on the hook so completely that I would end up spending 2.5 years getting through it? If I had to sum it up as simplistically as possible, it was a combination of excellent timing in my personal life and being blessed to have the internet on hand to allow me the means to watch them. At the age I'm at, I've found more joy in simpler stories that aren't overblown CGI spectacle, that tell meaningful human stories, and that's the entire essence of Tora San. Every movie is Tora dealing with his place in life, by the world standards a failure who never completed his education, who never achieved steady or dignified employment, but who constantly made a difference in the lives of other people by simply being him. He's the Japanese George Bailey allegory. Everybody he meets and is involved with is ultimately happier by his presence in their lives, and even if he never achieves his own dreams, by him being in theirs, he usually manages to help them find their own. During a particularly rough patch in my own life, this franchise hit like a pillowy ton of bricks. Not every movie was a bona fide winner, of course. In a series of 50 movies, you're going to have a dud or a less than perfectly satisfactory entry here and there, but by and large, the franchise shockingly maintained its quality to such an insanely high standard that it was simply a joy to go back to them week to week, which was my viewing habit given the busyness of life. But it made me excited to have Tora to look forward to every weekend, and some of the best entries I could share with my wife and my best friends also, and happily sharing Tora around increased happiness in my circles also. This series meant a lot to me going through it, and I'll happily be revisiting it for the rest of my life, because with 50 movies, obviously there's a lot of material to go back over. You forget a lot, even in smaller franchises between viewings, but if you watch this and you found yourself intrigued enough to want to watch any of these, the difficult question arises, how do you watch them? As stated, these movies are very Japanese, and a large part of the reason they never saw mass distribution or recognition in the West was not only the sheer size of the franchise, but the very slice-of-life nature of them. Not necessarily the biggest draw to more action-oriented Westerners, and so beyond those first 4 out-of-print movies, they never saw a release here. In my case, initially, it was a lot of work finding sources online, which often meant I also had to hunt down subtitle files for the movies just to be able to watch them. And obviously that's a lot of work that only crazies like me would ever go through. And eventually I kept my eyes open for a bargain and took advantage of a deal to get my hands on the complete series Blu-ray. But as you can imagine, with a 50-movie franchise, that is a very expensive proposition, especially if you're not sure you'll like the series. The franchise is also on Netflix from time to time, on Japanese Netflix with a VPN, so you could watch it that way, but from what I've gathered from people who actually live in the country, it doesn't seem Japanese Netflix provides the English subs. In conclusion, I've been a huge fan of Japanese media my whole life, from a lifelong obsession with Godzilla and kaiju to assorted anime and other classics and a stellar library of work. And Tora was a surprise revelation and a much-needed boost to my spirits exactly when I needed it most, and it was an incredibly satisfying journey. It's not going to be for everyone, but if by chance you ever find yourself in need of something a little slower, a little more introspective, and just being nothing but humbly human, then I absolutely, at the very, very least, recommend the original film. Just be wary because Tora is infectious. My favorite of the series is the 7th movie, Tora the Good Samaritan, as the title was localized in English, where Tora helps out a mentally challenged girl who runs away from her caregivers. If you dabble and find you absolutely want more of Tora and want a highlights reel from the franchise rather than the entire 50-movie experience, I can at least give you some options I find to be the best of the best, at least from my own recollection and tastes, but these will vary. The original film, as mentioned, the second film, Tora's Dear Mother, Tora San's Runaway, Tora the Good Samaritan, Tora San's Forget-Me-Not, which introduced recurring character Lily, arguably his one true love interest throughout the series, Stage-Struck Tora San, Tora San's Tropical Fever, which was writer Yamada's favorite in the franchise, Tora San Goes Religious, Tora San Goes North, which featured legendary Japanese actor Toshiro Mifune, Tora San goes to Vienna, which for Godzilla fans you get the added bonus of Tora's traveling companion in the film being played by Akira Emoto of Space Godzilla and Shin Godzilla fame. Tora San to the rescue, and the sort of epilogue film Welcome Home Tora San, released in 2019 on the series' 50th anniversary as a loving tribute to the whole franchise and centering around Mitsuo remembering his beloved uncle. Sort of a movie-length clip show, but with more meat and character development than just being a series of flashbacks, bringing the series to a proper end. All I can say to wrap this up is that I feel immensely fortunate and blessed to have had Tora San enter my life, for which I thank Giwa-chin all the more. Sometimes we never really understand what we were missing until we find it, and that's absolutely the case with this gentle and tender-hearted movie series. Okaeri, Tora San.